A senior senator has thrown down the gauntlet in what has become one of the biggest fights in Washington this fall. The Obama administration claims that the intel community underestimated the terror army known as ISIS. The intel community says that's not exactly true. And now a top senator has issued a challenge directly to President Obama. Ed Henry is our chief White House correspondent. He has the story. Ed?
Good evening, Megan. That's right. New tonight, Republicans calling for the president to release copies of his presidential daily brief. That is known as the PDB. It's the daily intelligence information, very sensitive information he gets about threats from all around the world. Republican Lindsey Graham saying tonight the only way to fact check what the president said on CBS's 60 Minutes on Sunday night, when he basically suggested that the intelligence community had kept him in the dark about the threat of ISIS, that they didn't keep up with it quick enough, is to get this information and see what the president was briefed on in recent months, the last year or so. And also worth noting, intel officials today blasting the president in the New York Times, suggesting that they had warned him. They set off alarm bells about the threat from ISIS, but he ignored them. Listen to this.
Quote, the White House just didn't pay attention to it. They were preoccupied with other crises. This was not a big priority. It sounds a lot different what the intelligence community is saying and what this White House is saying.
Well, the leader of the intelligence community is Jim Clapper. He's the director of national intelligence. And today he put out a message to the intelligence community that directly contradicts the anonymous individual who's quoted in the New York Times today.
Now, what Lindsey Graham is trying to do is follow up on reporting by our own Catherine Herridge, suggesting that in the president's daily brief for at least a year now, he's gotten warnings about the threat from ISIS, but that they were ignored. The White House has not denied that it was in the PDB, but I pressed Josh Earnest today, will you release that information? He said it's unlikely because this is highly classified, sensitive information, Megan.
All right, Ed Henry, thank you. Joining us now, Brit Hume, our Fox News senior political analyst. Brit, they're not wrong that James Clapper did come out and fall on his sword and say it was us. We didn't correctly estimate this threat. And the president was very quick to jump on that and say, see?
But, Megan, what he's saying is that they failed to estimate how well the Iraqi security forces, how well the Iraqi military would respond, because, as the White House keeps on telling us, it's awfully hard to know how a foreign military force will hold up when it gets down to the actual fighting. That's, of course, not exactly what the president said in the first place. He talked about underestimating ISIS.
But Clapper also said that they underestimated ISIS. He told that to David Ignatius of the Washington Post last week.
Well, that's fine. Clapper is a guy who has been in a kind of a weak position within the administration ever since he lied outright to Congress about whether there had been any, mass gathering of phone data on Americans. And he's in a position where I think his standing is such that he's not in a very good position to resist the administration if it wants him to say something. But be that as it may, Megan, look at it this way. By February of this year, ISIS had basically seized the Iraqi cities of Fallujah and Ramadi. Now, that's something a terrorist organization is not normally capable of doing. That is that kind of action that has happened then and since that has given rise to people saying that ISIS is like something we've never seen before. That is a terrorist army that can seize and control territory. Now, the facts on the ground, they were in the newspapers. If you had no intelligence reports, would have informed the president that something new and different was happening on the ground in Syria and in Iraq. So I think a little of this word games about, whether they underestimated or overestimated it, the facts were plain to see that something new and different and menacing was in Iraq and doing things that terrorist organizations aren't normally capable of. It was plain as day.
Is it shocking to see the commander-in-chief not take responsibility? One of my favorite sayings in life I got from you. Winners take responsibility, losers blame others. I'm not calling President Obama a loser, but this was an opportunity for him to take responsibility, was it not?
Well, it was, and he doesn't like to say he was wrong, and I think he's loath to believe it himself, because so much of his foreign policy is based on the idea that the presence of the American military forces in different places in the world is a destabilizing and a destructive factor. And he believed, I'm sure, that, the sooner we get out of these places, the better off everyone's going to be. Well, it hasn't worked out that way in place after place, and I think it's hard for him to face that. And one more thing, Megan. When we're talking about this question of the Iraqi security forces, there are a number of reports now that I've seen that are saying that when they began to deteriorate, and rapidly, when the U.S. pulled out all of our forces, that our forces were there, and among the things they did is they kept an eye on the Iraqi security forces and on their leaders. And that the Iraqi security forces were indeed, during a period of time, a competent fighting force. They began to deteriorate after we left and after Maliki started to turn it into kind of a patronage army and a place for his favored Shiites to hold offices and collect money. And it's a corrupt force now, and I think it's weak. And what we're seeing tonight in the outskirts of Baghdad is further proof of that.
Wow. Britt, thank you.
You bet.
Up next, why is a college letting a convicted cop killer give a commencement address? We will hear directly from the college and from that police officer's widow right here live next.